Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips and techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Welcome newcomers to the Facebook group, podcasts and our Teachific resources. We love hearing the diverse reasons why teachers across the world are joining. So much deep and creative literacy work going on in schools. Some recent comments. I would like to improve my practice and help students get excited about reading and writing. Whatever knowledge I can gain to help our students. I'm a reading teacher and looking for all the resources I can get. Knowledge of effective practices. Love to hear Diane Snowball on your podcasts. And I'd love ways to help support our students. So if you're not a member of the Teacher's Toolkit Facebook group, we'd love you to join and introduce yourself to the group. Now, welcome to this podcast called Writing in the Early Years, Questions and Answers with Teachers, speaking with Diane Snowball. So recently, the teachers at a school who've been working on language experience approach in particular were keen to take themselves further in their writing in the early years, and they presented to Di a number of questions that they would hope that she could answer for them in a workshop situation or in a Q&A situation. So they're a lot about the language experience approach in particular, but really about better ways of teaching writing. So we're hoping this session will also help you clarify understandings, so some of those better ways for teaching writing. And we thank the Year 1 teachers and leaders at Mildura West Primary School in Victoria for sharing their session with Di and with all of us. So reasons for this topic today, we've really identified, what's the teaching struggle that both the questions brought forward and Di's responses gave us insights into. So as teachers, we wonder about how language experience approach works in reality in our classrooms. How do we make more use of the writing we are doing together? How do we not waste opportunities in our classroom and teach in more effective ways? Also, how does it help students learn further about their reading and writing? So both through the language experience approach and through good ways of having opportunities that advance the reading and writing in our classrooms. This one really adds on to how do we make more use of the writing in our classrooms, but really thinking more of the kinds of teaching that we can do with our early writers through shared writing, through interactive writing and modelled writing. So those as processes that we can be using or instructional tools that we can be using with our students along with that language experience approach. And lastly, how do we help students to see themselves as writers from the very beginning? So because we're focusing here on writing in the early years, how do we get our students to see themselves as writers from day one? And how can we start doing that? Before I let you listen into these wonderful questions and answers from Di, I just wanted to share a little bit of what I've experienced in the last just 2 weeks in working side by side in that side-by-side coaching work that I do with teachers. I've had the absolute privilege of working with 6 early years teachers in the last 2 weeks, and in particular teachers teaching that first year of school. So in South Australia we call it reception, in some of the states pre-primary or prep. I'm just talking about those 5-year-olds in that setting. And I loved hearing how teachers in each of those classrooms had constructed for every child in that class that they are readers and writers from the very first day of school through modelled writing and shared writing and interactive writing and language experience approach. In the first 2 months of this school year, these children are gaining such knowledge about how writing works and what they, through those processes, can take with them into their independent writing. And so for every child in every one of these classes, the mantra really is that when they move off to be doing their own independent writing, they are all absolutely and entirely in the knowledge that they go off to write and they write the best they can. And that was the words used by every child in those classes, that with this great joy and wonder of having been involved in so many shared writing experiences, and by shared I mean those teacher modelling and students engaging in that, to be able to go off to their own piece of paper or to their own book to go and be the writer. So over to the teachers from Mildura West Primary School and to Di to be in conversation about how writing in the early years can really be strengthened and improved and have our students really feeling like they are being the writer every day.
From my understanding, you would like to talk about language experience first of all, is that right?
That's right. Before this session, the girls have all taken time to read your language document, which brought up a few questions because it is a little different to how we've been doing language experience. So one of the girls will explain what we've been doing, and then in line with reading, they have a few questions and then we can maybe springboard from there. Does that sound okay?
Yep, terrific.
So in the past, we've done a bit of reading on language experiences over the last few years, but we've always had the approach that it's been like a group shared experience. So we might go and make something or do an activity. Whereas when we've read your language experience today, we sort of gathered that it's more of a personal approach, like an individual experience that you write about and share.
You can have language experience being per child, right? Like I write language experience books with my goddaughter's children. It's about their personal experience. But I would do exactly the same thing with a group or my class. It's not different.
Okay, well, that's good. We just sort of interpreted differently from the reading today. So, for example...
I'll have to read it again to make sure no one could misinterpret that.
But, for example, this week, like we've been outside, we've had the parachute outside, and we've all had a play with that, and then we've come back in and we've talked about it, and we've done a shared writing, and then kids have gone off to do their independent writing from that. So that's the kind of things that we do. We make things, have a craft, do a dance, lots of little things like that.
So when you said you write about it, and then what happens to that writing?
So we don't make shared books every day. So we might make like a class book of the writing maybe once a week. I think that's about what we're doing. So a lot of the kids are doing independent writing, and that writing does stay in their book. But we're doing the experience to create that oral language that they can talk about and share, and then we do the shared writing together, and then off they go and write independently.
Okay, so my thoughts about that is that it's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but that you're just not making enough use of the writing that you're doing together. Mm-hmm. And it's such a useful piece to help children learn a lot about reading. And the reason for that is because one of the most important cues you use as a reader is the knowledge you bring to what you're reading. And, you know, if I gave a child to read a book about elephants and they didn't know what an elephant was, it would be very difficult to understand. So when you start from their experience and you write about it and then they read about it, they've had the experience. So they have all that meaning. You've also, you know, helped them construct it. So the syntax they have, don't they? Because it's their language structure. So that's why it's such an important tool to use for helping kids learn about reading. And I often think that as teachers, we don't make enough use of the print that we have. we sort of write something and then it's, off you go to do something else. Whereas you can get so much out of what you've already got. And so that's why there's a lot in that document then about taking what you've written and rereading it. And honestly, I was just thinking about it when I was having a break, that one of the most successful teachers I've ever worked with, and this was in New York, would actually do so much with that piece of language, even when they were constructing it. I think I've got an example of how to do it. She would leave a word blank for the kids to work out what it could be. And then she would purposely choose that word as being one that might be a high frequency word or a word they could do onset rhyme work with. And so then they would, use that to jump off and do their onset rhyme work or learn high frequency words. But they always read what they had written together, reread it the next day. So they had, 2 lots to read. By the third day, they had 3 lots to read. They were just rereading and therefore learning so much about how to be a reader. And they were learning high frequency words. They were learning onset and rhyme. They would do their sound explorations. She would take what they'd written and make sentence strips and cut them up, and they'd reconstruct them. So everything about reading and writing and the spelling aspect of it, they were learning through that language experience work. And that was really how it was firstly developed. But it really is meant to be a tool to help kids learn a lot about reading and writing. And, it's interesting, at the end of the year, I can remember asking these kids, and these were only prep kids, tell me the words you know how to write. And, they'd write my, and then they'd write cry, buy, spy, fly, and then they'd think of another word, and they would just, 3 pages of words they knew. And I'd say, that's enough, They just had learned so much about the way words work because they'd reused that print in so many ways. So I just think you're wasting an opportunity, I guess, that you could do more with.
And Di, just on that, so at the moment, our girls are doing 4 to 5 language experiences a week. The kids are doing one every day to drive the excitement, the passion for writing. So do you suggest, I know that the teacher in New York revisited that language experience the following day as part of the reading. So do you suggest that to the girls here so that their shared writing that they're doing about language experience, they loop back the next day in part of their reading session and revisit that writing from the previous day? And so it's not wasted, but at the same time, it's quite time consuming, isn't it, to keep like if we're going back, looping back.
There's nothing time consuming about rereading. That's why shared reading works so well, because you're rereading. But also, why are the kids thinking about something new to write every day? I would like to model for them that we go on with what we were doing the day before. And so, if we had an experience today, and see, the range of writing that you can be demonstrating by doing this too is quite varied, isn't it? So if you tell me about one of your experiences might be a craft that you make something, well, then there's an ideal opportunity for writing instructions, isn't it, for how to make something. So we don't have to write the whole thing that day. We can write some today, then we'll go on with the rest of the instructions tomorrow and the day after. And we'll think about, with each page of the instructions, what's the type of artwork that goes with that? Because with instructions, it's matching what the instructions are to show the next step in the diagrams of how you make that. And, well, it is a whole. It's not just writing a couple of sentences about something. It's actually building on it. So if you want to have different experiences every day, there's nothing wrong with that. But I would at least take one of those experiences and build on it and show how you would develop that into a whole piece, not just one day's worth of writing. You're actually modelling that writing is just, we write something different every day.
Yes, and it made me think about our discussion we just had with the prep style too, about getting our kids to be able to write in different forms and different styles. They don't have to write their book every day. They could be writing a letter to someone about what they've just done.
That's right.
They could be writing, like you said, instructions to give someone at home to make that little craft thing. the purpose and the variance, so it's not just always writing their books. That
I don't know how you could do that in one sitting. If I was going to model, if let's say we're learning about frogs, we're going to observe our frogs over a number of days, and we're continually learning something else. Well, we want to keep adding to that. So I end up with a whole book about frogs. And all of the types of diagrams that go with that are quite different again as well. So you don't just stop writing about what you're writing about today and then tomorrow write something else. That's not the way writing happens. That's, if you're not building on what you did yesterday, and it doesn't mean you can't have different experiences every day. I'm not saying stop your experiences. You can still talk about them. The kids might want to write about any one of those experiences in their own personal writing. But when I'm modelling what writers do, I don't want to just write today and say that tomorrow I'm going to write something else. That's the exact opposite of what I would want to model.
Terrific. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's great.
Nothing wrong with what you're doing, but you're just not making enough use of it to go further.
Yep. No, it's good.
So on one day, for example, on the first day, it might be like a recount type of writing, and then you said on the next day it might be a procedural type of writing about the same.
No, not the next day. No, not the next day. If I was writing a recount, I would start my story today, and I also would be thinking about how I'm going to model that. And sometimes when they write, I can remember writing a recount with a grade 1 about how we planted bulbs. Well, then we took that recount and rewrote it as instructions. So you can do something like that. But we didn't write the whole recount of everything about the bulbs just in one sitting. We started to write and then we wrote more the next day and more the next day because, it was a whole book of what we did. And in fact, it took place, that particular instance took place over a number of weeks. We were doing other stuff in the meantime, but we were watching our bulbs grow, etc. So, no, I'm not going to do a different kind of writing every day. I'm going to do different kinds of writing during the year, quite purposefully. But I'm going to really show them how I would write one type over, a week or 2 weeks, 3 days, whatever it takes. But I don't have to write something different every day, not at all.
Okay, so during the shared writing, when you're constructing that text with the children, what are they writing during their independent writing time after that?
Whatever they like. Their writing should be as varied as it can possibly be. It should not just be on the same topic that we've done shared writing on.
That's where we're coming undone. I think that's our misunderstanding. That's why we're confused, because we're looking at it from a different lens.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, what you're doing through your shared writing through the year is showing them lots of kinds of writing they can do. You're building up their repertoire. When it comes to their independent writing, like, for example, today, one child might want to write about the experience you've had, but another child might have just got a new bike last night and they want to write about that. And another child might want to write a poem about being sad or, writing is, first of all, you have an audience and you have a purpose. So I'm writing this for other people to read and enjoy, or I'm writing this because I want to write a letter to someone I want them to read, or I want to make a birthday card, or I want to write about what I'm learning about snails, or I want to write about how to mend a puncture on my bike. Even just the topic bikes, I could write about how to care for my bike. I could write about how I got my new bike. I could write about where I went on my bike, how to mend a puncture, a whole range of kinds of writing that are just all around the one topic. And that's what I'm trying to build the kids' repertoire. So, if I say to kids, what do you want to write today? It should be anything. Okay. Perhaps they will not find that easy to do at the moment because they're used to just writing about what you've set the writing task to be. They're not used to thinking for themselves. Would that be right?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're going back to when I was at school and we were set a composition topic. It was taught a composition, but it was writing, but we were told what kind of writing we had to do, always. We were never allowed to think for ourselves.
Our thinking behind language experiences, I'm not speaking for everyone, just myself here, but I've always been of the understanding that a lot of kids don't have an experience or things to write about, and that doing something together gives them that opportunity to write. So that's language. And to have that oral language, the chat before we write. And that's why we've done those experiences each day, to give the children something to write about.
I'm not saying they're not allowed to do that. I'm just saying that you're actually telling every child every day that's what they have to write about. And I think you need to loosen that up, because you're building all those experiences so they'll have lots of things to write about. Yes. Now, they also have to think about, who's this writing for? What kind of writing is it going to be, that suits my purpose? I want to tell someone how to take care of a dog, or I want to tell someone how much I love my dog. They're very, but I have a dog that I'm very interested in and I want to do some writing. Well, what's my purpose going to be? And I know that my feedback to the kids, my prodding them is usually along the lines of, well, who's the writing for? What do you want the writing to do? What do you want it to be? Because I think the hardest question is, what's the writing going to be about? That's not where writers start. They start by saying, I'm going to write a story, or I'm going to write, a non-fiction piece about such and such, or I'm going to write a poem. So they don't start from what it's about necessarily. And you're trying to develop them as writers, what writers do. And it's wonderful that you're giving them lots of experiences. And by the way, when we say kids don't have experiences at home, they do. They might not have the range of experiences we wish they could have, and we want to broaden that. And I think that's wonderful that you're doing that.
Yes, that is our goal behind it. Yeah. Who's next? Who's got another question?
My question, Di, is you say in this text that it's suitable to scribe for a student, write statements, get them to say what is written. How often, and provide illustrations, or they might illustrate that. Is that something suitable to do each day for children that have low literacy skills, still learning the alphabet? Or would you do that a few times a week? To me, for instance, that child that can articulate and say what they want to say and draw might be their only capability. For me, that is writing, but it's not writing. Do we scribe for them every day? Would you do it every second day? Would you let them have that day where they independently free range and we accidentally end up with three high frequency words in this non-readable text? But that just means that words are
right. Let's think about child by child is our teaching, isn't it? Right? We're thinking about what's best for this child at this point in time. The other thing is, I have to be very careful about how often I would write for a child. Otherwise, they will not write for themselves. So for some children, I would never write for them, because their greatest problem is that they won't write for themselves. And they'll always say, how do you spell this? How do you spell that? And my greatest goal for them is to get them to have a go and to realize that it doesn't matter if they don't know how to spell. They can still use whatever scribing they're doing, wherever they're at in their stage of development. After all, they're only at the beginning of grade 1. So how many words do they know how to spell, right, correctly? I'm very much encouraging every child to have a go, because it's that experimentation that's actually going to help them learn a lot about how words work, and also help me to know what they know and what they don't know. So the thing about writing for children is that whole notion about, and it's very much more to do with a beginning child. What you say can be written down, and then you will be able to read it. So I'm just showing them that relationship between what you say and what you write and what you read. But that's not what I'm going to go on doing. That's not them writing. that is giving them something to read that they have spoken about, but it's not helping their writing. So that was how language experience work began. We always wrote for the children. And when I was, well, let's see, what year was it that we realised we should be letting children write for themselves? It would have been, not until the 1970s or 80s. Yeah, probably into the 80s. So when I first started teaching preps in 1972, and you weren't even born, that we were taught that because it was a reading experience, what you say can be written down and you can read it. So I would write it for the child. And of course, when I realised later on that, well, that's not them writing, and goodness me, when I do let them write, how much do I learn about them? It's wonderful, isn't it? I learned which kids in my class can write whole words, which are just using scribble, boy, did I learn a lot. So it's a big change in what language experience work started out to be. So when you say, would I do that every day? No way. And in fact, it's sort of, I'm trying to think of who is the child that I might do that for in my class. It's not the child who's not willing to have a go, because that will stop them from having a go. Right. The other thing is that sometimes it's okay if something's going to be published for others to read, that I might write underneath the child's, like still saying, what you have done, I value, and we're going to leave it as it is. But for other people to read it, it needs to be in book language. I would actually use that terminology, not you're wrong, but here's how we would find it in a book. So I'll write that under here. And then we can actually make that into a little book, even put a borrowing card in the back of it and write about the author. And it can even go into our classroom library for other people to read. So that's once a term, because that's a time-consuming process, isn't it? Okay. I mean, it was very common in the past to really take that trouble and make actual little hardbound books of the children's writing. It's a long time since I've seen anyone do that, but we were actually taught how to get cardboard and make covers and bind the books together so that they really had a published book of their own. But with very young children, we often had to write, with most of the kids, we would have to rewrite the words underneath so others could read it. Does that all make sense to you?
Yes. Yeah.
Or you still got a query about, like, you might never write for a child, but you might notice a time when, the other thing sometimes I'll have children say, oh, how do you write said? I know there's an S and I know there's a D, but I really don't know how to write it. I would write that word for that child, right? Because they don't know how to write it, but they know a lot about it. And they're used to having a go at other words, but they really want to know how to write it. It's a bit like my husband used to always ask me when he was writing something, how do you spell such and such? And I'd say, well, what's the base word and what prefix you add in and what something? He'd say, I don't want a spelling lesson. I'm going to hurry and I just want to know how to spell this word, right? So you judge children according to what you think is going to be the best thing for them at that time. And if I was going to write that word, by the way, I would write it probably, I love them to have a margin with their writing. I could write it in the margin and then they could copy it themselves. But I also need to teach children how to copy a word, because this is what you'll notice they do. They go, look at the word and they'll say S, and they'll write the S, A, I, D. They'd have to ask me how to spell that word again in 5 minutes, right? Where if I teach them to say, well, now, what was there about that word that you weren't sure about? You knew there was an S at the beginning, knew there was a D at the end. What do you have to look at really closely in that word? Oh, it's got an AI in the middle. So when I picture that word, I have to really make sure I'm focusing on there's an AI in the middle of that word. Now I'm going to write it over here, SAID. I'm not even copying it. I've already thought about what does it look like? What does it sound like? Now I'm going to have a go at it. Then I will check to make sure I've actually copied it correctly. So all these little things make a difference to how much children learn, don't they? How we go about it. Does that answer your question enough?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Hi, I've just got a question about what your big books would look like after you've done a language experience.
What the class big book would look like?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so at the moment we make them and you do it by.
Yep.
There's a few different ways we do them. Sometimes we might get the kids writing and kind of
Yes.
add them to the book. And other times we would scribe a sentence each about a picture that we've taken about, so something that they've made.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm just wondering what's the right way, or what would you suggest?
Well, there isn't a right way. You can do all of those sorts of things. But what you need to remember is ultimately it all has to have the right punctuation, spelling, everything, because it's going to be read.
Yeah.
Anything that's going to be read needs to be properly published writing. If the kids can do the illustrations, that's fantastic, because it's time consuming for us and much more meaningful for them. It's good comprehension work to illustrate what the text is anyway, isn't it? Even if a child perhaps might have done the writing and made a mistake, I would just use whiteout tape and fix that bit up. And I explained to them why. It's not that I don't appreciate what you've done, but other people are going to read it, so we need to make sure it's book language.
So would you suggest, like, if the kids were to write, like, in the book, would you suggest sharing the pen and getting them to write like a page each about the experience they've had, or would we be scaffolding that more?
I'm more inclined to be the scribe for that, but with kids who are able to write, they could do the writing. It depends, what their writing's like. Remembering it's got to be able to be very legible and easily read and properly spelled. That would be fine. If you've got some kids who could do some of the writing, that would be great. But mostly I tend to be the scribe for that.
Yeah.
Depends on your kids. If you've got some kids who could do the writing for you, you might. Yeah, let them do it. I reckon every teacher needs to sign up their room. Don't do what the children could do for you. I'm serious. I mean, if we would go on an excursion, I would get one of the kids to find out where will we hire the bus from, or make the phone call, or whatever. Let them learn how to do all of those things. Work out the map of how we're going to get there, So, yep, the more you get the kids to do, the better.
Now that we've got a bit more of an understanding of not necessarily providing the students with a language experience daily, you were saying, that it's okay for them they want to write a letter or a poem or something about their likes or interests. Do they need to have an understanding of those different types of writing first before you let them, okay, you go and write a letter, or I want to write a letter, like how much knowledge and understanding do they need to know, about a certain topic, or, to give them that bit more of a free choice?
The type of writing, you mean, the genre? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's why I'm always thinking, as I plan during the year, I'm always looking out for the opportunities to demonstrate different genre of writing, so that...
Sorry, I was probably meaning coming out of, like, obviously they're just out of prep.
Yes.
Still early days, grade 1. So, yeah, how much understanding do they have about those other genres?
Well, often it depends on what they're reading too. If you've got non-fiction books in your class library, they will have noticed a lot about. And that's why another reason why I say you must read some non-fiction to the kids every day. It builds up their knowledge, and you're also exposing them to entirely different kinds of writing. Most non-fiction is even written in present tense, whereas most stories are written in past tense. So, it's very important for them to hear both of those language styles and to have seen, not just be, us modelling how to write one. I'll tell you what worries me the most these days. I don't think children are seeing very many different kinds of writing being done in their homes. You know, parents, you included, all write to your friends now just by sending messages on your iPhone or your iPad. When was the last time a child, if in your household, would have seen you take pen and write something? Whereas I actually have in my collection of children's writing, preschool, every kind of writing under the sun, from business cards, invoices, bank slips, stories, poems, play scripts, appointment books, whatever they saw adults do around them, they would mimic. Now, I don't see that very much at all now. It's a very interesting. One of my goddaughters makes her boys, well, she doesn't make them anymore. They like doing it. Whenever it's someone's birthday, she actually gets them to send a birthday card because she doesn't want them to forget how to do that. But that's rare. You know, I'm not sure they even know how to write a card.
So I guess, you know, that importance of linking it to the reading and having big books and things like that about those different genres would help support that too.
Yes, and of course, they'll be read aloud mostly because, you know, big books that are non-fiction tend to be much harder to read. The children won't be able to join in with you, but you certainly could be using them for read aloud, and they're seeing it all in a much bigger format. But there are some that are written for your age group. Unfortunately, all of the good big books were published a long time ago now, and it's very hard to buy them, isn't it? You've sort of got to find them probably in your school rather than something you'll be able to buy from a publisher. But that's okay if you get them to reading aloud to the kids. But certainly what we demonstrate in what we make ourselves from our language experience work, you can demonstrate how to write all kinds of texts, can't you? And that should be your plan over the year, that by the end of the year, you've demonstrated as many different kinds of writing as you possibly can.
We found in the last few years, Di, that we've sort of stepped away from naming the genres of text to the kids a little bit, because when we went to write, they were bogged down with what that text was, what was in it. So we just wanted our kids to write.
Yes.
So how do we go forward from that now? Do we start introducing, this is a recount, or this is a retell, or this is a procedure? What do we do now?
I think you should start using the language. After all, it is important to know that these are instructions for how to do something, and that's why we write it in a different way. And I would explore that with the kids. I would get some different books of instructions and notice that we don't write full sentences when we write instructions necessarily. And I always start with a doing word, you know, like plant the bulb, sow the seed, water the garden. You want to start bringing these things to their attention, but not the way that some of the publishers put out these charts saying, you know, every report has to be written exactly this way. And I mean, even NAPLAN itself's very bad, because saying that the only way to write persuasion is to sort of state your case and then give 2 examples and blah, blah. Probably the most persuasive pieces of writing I've got are poetry, songs, you know, an advertisement that's, you know, they're really clever at that, the ad guys, aren't they? They certainly don't write persuasion in the way they have to in NAPLAN. So I don't mean for you to get down to there's only one way to write. And even if you look at instructions, if it's science, they'll talk about the method, you know, so there'll be the equipment and then the method. Whereas if it's cooking instructions, it'll be the ingredients and the instructions. So even noticing that depending on the type of instructions you're writing, that the language might change for the headings, but the same type of writing happens for all instructions. I actually think instructions are very easy ones for your kids to learn how to do. Don't you find that?
Yeah.
And especially, as I say, I have often written recounts with the kids because that's what tends to come out of their mouths. And then we'll go back. And if it was a how to do something or how to make something, then we'll rewrite it as an instruction. And they can see the difference then in the style that we're using. Does that help you enough?
Yeah, that was great.
That question. Yeah.
Rich conversation about language experience, because I know, our school, it's 50-50 equity and not equity funded children. So that hasn't always been the case. So we really worked hard on providing experiences for the kids to expand their vocab and their writing excitement, because we've had many years where the kids were not excited by writing. So we feel like we're in a good place now where the kids are excited by writing. We're providing lots of rich experiences, but we sort of just need the next step now. We're sort of treading water a little bit, as in we're sort of going through the motions, doing the same things, and because we're doing 4 or 5 language experiences a day, we're running out of great ideas to keep this momentum going. It's been going for a couple of years now. So I guess this has been a fantastic discussion to show that one language experience could go over a couple of days and produce the same type of writing, or the children might branch off and start to write a different style of writing based on the same language experience.
Yeah. I certainly find that mostly it's more than a week that we would continue on with some writing. And I think that really helps them to build their writing rather than, just writing 1 or 2 sentences. They realise that we can keep going. It doesn't just finish on the first day, that whatever we put down, that's it. And I'm sure that's the next step that your children need to be taking.
Yeah, definitely.
That's actually researched really widely and very deeply, that choice increases motivation. And motivation is one of the major factors in affecting how well people do things. For kids, how well they read and write.
And our grade 2 to 6s have really been delving deep into the writer's notebook, which lends itself to more scope of, free choice of writing, whereas our infants, our prep ones, we've been quite scripted in sticking with language experience and all doing the same experience and writing about it, and using our units of inquiry to drive writing. But this conversation has been great just to open it up to the next step for us for the infants, because our 2 to 6s definitely have lots of choice and they've got lots of great things happening, and our prep ones now producing terrific writing, but we're just treading water, like I said before.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, you've got a good foundation to work from.
I've got another question. It's not so much about the language experience, but more about kids sharing their ideas. So we do a lot of think, pair, share. We've had an experience and we're doing that on the floor. But sometimes it gets a little bit stale with the kids. Have you got some suggestions of other ways that they can share their thinking with others? What's worked for you?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what writers do. Like Paul Jennings is a very famous and very competent short story writer. And your kids, if they're writing stories, are definitely writing short stories. And Paul would, the experience, it's really good if the audience is going to be interested. The experience needs to be funny or sad or surprising, or what else makes stories interesting for people? Usually funny and sad are the one. Paul writes lots of funny ones, right? Funny things that happened. But they're sort of about something that happened that you want to tell about. Now, you do this in your own life. It might even be me coming home last night and telling about how busy it was when I got out of the ballet last night, because the football was also on in Melbourne near the Arts Centre, and it took me 3/4 of an hour to just get out of the car park at the Arts Centre. Now, the more that I tell that story, the more I embellish it, and the more that I make it interesting for someone, right? And that's what Paul said. He would come up with a story and then he would retell it to himself in the shower, and he'd tell it to his wife, and he'd tell it to his kids. And every time he told it, it got better. And then he was willing to write it down. And I have found if I let the kids tell their story, so not just share an idea, but actually tell the story and then go off and tell it again and again, that by the time they've told it a few times, it's better. And then they're ready to write it down. And so I don't think we let kids do enough of that talking before they write. So you've already got a bit of that going, which is wonderful. but it's the what kind of talk will actually make the story better. Now, of course, they need to actually think about what's worth telling, and it might be, this is where something that's happened to them personally, the day that such and such happened to them that was, I don't know, really bad or really good, or, made them really happy, made them cry. I mean, it's got to have some sort of emotive thing to it to get other people interested, or it's a story worth telling, but they retell it and retell it. So I would give that a try. I've certainly worked that since Paul told me what he did many years ago. I've tried that with lots of classes and it's worked really well. The other thing is that that's only sort of story writing. And I do actually think that nonfiction writing is much easier. And particularly if you pick something that you know a lot about, or that's something that you could perhaps do some little bit of a research on, even by at this age, by asking people. But if you're interested in, like one of my goddaughter's little boys, so interested in tractors, he could tell you everything about every kind of tractor. In grade 1, he could write a fantastic book about tractors. And the detail in his drawings when it comes to tractors is unbelievable. So again, I think that it's hard to tell a story. It's hard to write a story, isn't it? Don't you find it hard to write a story?
Yes.
But it's really much easier to write nonfiction. So I think that's another, particularly now that you want your kids to branch out a bit, to have them think more about their hobbies and their interests, or what they know about, or what they'd like to know about.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
And talking, telling what they know. Sometimes they don't even realise what they know themselves till they tell someone.
Yeah.
I've just got one last question for you. When we've got kids engaged in their writing, or we've got strong writers, is it all right to send them back to start writing if you're doing a model or a shared writing? Like, would you just have, if you've got 6 or 7 kids that just have this idea, they're talking about it, they're ready to go, would you just tell them to go and start and then do your modeled or shared or interactive writing with the rest of the group? Or should they be involved in that whole class aspect?
Well, it depends what you're doing. If you think that they'll really benefit, but, in a way, I think because you've actually had kids go and write about what you're doing, the same as you're doing, I think that's more inclined to be happening. Whereas I think if you think about your modelled writing as being, again, like a mini lesson that over the year you're trying to build up lots of ideas, well, then you might do several, on stories, you can do several days on just good story starters. And you would want everybody to be involved in that, right? So it depends on what you're doing. But in the main, I think you'll find with the changes you're making that you'll just sort of have the whole class. It'll be no more than 10 minutes, right? And then they're all writing. I think there's a whole good thing about everybody's now going to write. But look, there's no rule about it. If that works for you and your kids and everybody's happy and they're all doing a great job, go for it.
Great. That's good. Well, thank you so much, Di. I think we've got lots to think about, that's for sure. And the girls have got lots
all right,
to discuss next
good.
time.
Well, if you're not sure about anything, just you don't have to wait for a Zoom meeting. You can phone me anytime.
If you did have a one of your books that you've created with the kids floating around somewhere, we'd love to see what one of your experience books.
Yeah, and I was trying to. I just keep giving everything away. I know on my iPad I've got one that I created. You got Story Creator on your iPad?
I've got Book Creator.
Is that the one?
It might be called Book Creator, where you can take the pictures and then you add the text.
Yes.
See, I think that's fantastic. And I do have a few of those that I've written with kids. But if you know how to do that, then you don't need to look at it. But it's interesting because they were 5-year-olds. I wrote it along the lines that it would become a really great book for them to learn to read from. Like, Sophie likes riding a bike. Tom likes being on the tractor. Sophie likes painting. Tom likes making stuff with clay, So I sort of would add a bit of a pattern to it so that it became something they were easily able to read. And then with most of all, Tom and Sophie love being read to, So all of the photographs, of course, went with that. I reckon what a breeze in comparison with when I started teaching. We had to take the photographs and have them developed and then, I don't know, run them off on the Aronio machine. 6 months later, we'd have a book. I can have a book in 5 minutes with this. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. Do you use it much? Do you use the story?
Not enough. Definitely not enough.
Well, I just think that's such a wonderful tool for something for the kids to read. Wow. There's a special school in Werribee where the principal heard me talking about this, and he got every kid in the special school an iPad, and every single one of them had about 100 stories by the end of the year about them.
That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah. So do try and make more use of that. I bet you could teach some of your kids how to do it themselves. They're better with all of this than we are, aren't they?
Yeah. They certainly are. All right, thank you so much, Di. We're ducking off now. Anne's running a wrap-up session at 2:00, so we best
Okay, terrific. Wonderful. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And do ask whatever you like, whenever you like. Okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
Big thanks to Mildura West Primary School teachers for putting yourselves out there with those questions today about early writers. All of those questions speak to me as well as a classroom teacher, and I know that many people will benefit from the fact that you have identified the kinds of things that you are grappling with, working with, and wanting to advance in your teaching of early writers. And thank you, Di, for always giving us insight from lived experience, giving us practical advice, giving us the insider's guide to where we can go, how we can do it, and especially the language that we can use in doing that work. So thank you to everyone who has been part of this podcast today, and thank you everyone who's been listening for joining us. We've loved to see that so many of you have subscribed to our episodes from all corners of the world. The Teacher's Toolkit podcast is all about giving you an insider's guide to top teaching ideas, tools, techniques in literacy teaching and learning. Please subscribe to our weekly newsletter via the website. You'll receive advance notice on blogs, podcasts, events, and ways to contact us. Thank you, and all the best to you, our listeners. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.